somewhere around an
Sorry.
hour this morning. So anyway, I think, Pam, you've already talked about if somebody has questions, put them in the chat, and of course, make sure you're muted. And we will try to get to everybody's questions. Hopefully they'll be answered in the conversation with Doug. So Doug, as a lot of you know, is a fabulous pastelist, and he graduated with a BFA in art design from the California College of Arts in Oakland. And he's got some nice titles to his name. He's a distinguished pastelist with our organization, and he's a Master Circle artist with IAPS, and he's had work accepted and won awards in the Pastel Journal and PSA and etc. So anyway, let's Doug, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Yes, the beautiful sunshine here on the West Coast overlooking the San Francisco Bay. And I'm sure everybody is experiencing some kind of sunshine across the country. I see people from Oregon and Montana and North Carolina. That's pretty cool. Atlanta, Georgia. Wow.
People from all over. Yeah. Thanks so much for joining in. So Doug, when you were a child, what did you want to be when you grew up? What were your dreams?
Healthy.
Yeah.
No, I really didn't know what my gift was going to mean to me until later, but it was always there. I could whittle, I could carve things and work with clay and draw, always drawing. And it was amazing that looking back, I really congratulate my parents for giving me space to do all that, and allowing me to just play, but with being creative as well. So amongst all the other things that I had to do as a kid, but it was not until I got into the daycare for the end of World War II, when my parents both worked at McClellan Air Force Base and the civilian capacities, but they had a daycare center set up at the high school that I was eventually going to attend out in what was called Del Paso Heights, which was about 30 miles north of Sacramento. Anyway, I was able to keep up with the older boys drawing airplanes and guns and weapons and everything, because at the time that's what we were thinking about, is war. And but I knew at that point that I could draw, and it just sort of stuck with me. And it wasn't until later I went into high school that my art teacher, Dean Gibson, sort of focused my skills in that area, and then to junior college, and then on to art school in Oakland, California. But it was something that I could fall back onto anytime I wanted to. It was always there, no matter what I was called upon to do.
So Doug, were your parents artistic?
Not at all. Not at all. My dad was a printer by trade. He grew up in Vacaville, California, and then he moved to Stockton, California. And out of high school, he was hired to work in a print shop. And that was his trade the rest of his life. He was a printer. And but his technology was like 200 years old, and movable type and hand setting, and working with letterpress and whatnot. So I learned all of that at his elbow, working with him, filing type away in the little type cases and all that. But my mom was a homemaker, but she was very creative. I didn't know it at the time, but all of the stuff that she did, she would work with crafts, and if she wanted to build a bird bath out in the backyard, she just dove in and did it. dug the hole and got the cement, and no, there was nothing to stop her from doing crafty things and building things. So I think I had the best of both worlds. My dad was very articulate and doing whatever, and mom was very creative. So between the two of them, I think I got both the right and left brain attitude through life.
Yeah, that's great. So in high school, you did a lot of art, right?
Yes, yes. Dean Gibson was a master with a lettering brush, the chiseled brush, and that really inspired me to carry on with lettering. And knowing about topography and whatnot with working with my dad, that sort of carried over. And one of the teacher's abilities was he used to create these huge, big lobby cutout, individual hand-painted images for the next movie that was in town or whatever. And he just did lobby art. And he used a projector. He taught us how to use a projector and whatnot. And using a projector all the way through my professional career in advertising and whatnot, that was kind of a tool that we all had to use, because speed was the utmost criteria for getting projects done. And using a projector helped facilitate that quite a bit, to the point where down the road, when I was probably 1980, actually 1970, I was so enamored with all the illustrators around at that time that were very creative, and I still admire them. Bob Peak, Bernie Fuchs, Alan Kober, Mark English, that when it came time to go to one of their workshops back in New York, we just bit the bullet and went back to do that. And that was very awe-inspiring to be able to take part in all of that and work with illustrators. But that was just sort of part of the whole thing about being a professional artist. And I had a 30-year career, 30-year plus, in advertising and graphic design, illustration, as an art director for all kinds of projects.
So what mediums what did you start off with when you were doing your fine art? Did you start off with pastels right away, or did you use other mediums?
And yes, because somewhere along the line when I was younger, I acquired a set of new pastels, and which are, as everybody knows, they're very hard pastel, but I learned how to work with them. And even in art school, I used them because, again, it was very fast, dry, and the project and assignments they gave you helped facilitate that. So whether it was gouache or watercolors or whatever, they take time to dry, but pastels were very quick. And the colors were there, brilliant, and you can overlap and cover up things and cover over mistakes and whatnot. And then that carried over into my professional career. And I used pastels a lot for creating the composition, comprehensives for different projects. I did a lot of work for national agencies, advertising agencies and whatnot. So pastel was really one of the main tools I used. And when I finally got into my retirement, I just found that the pastels were still there, and they answered all the projects I was wanting to get into. And what really focused me at the end of my professional career in getting into fine arts was my wife happened to work for a real estate company in Emeryville, California. At the time, one of the founders and owners of the company went to a boat show, and working there at the boat show was a table set up by an artist by the name of Ken Lardier. At the time, she was doing animal portraits, whether dogs, animals, or whatever. And they commissioned her to do a family portrait of a dog as a gift to one of the family members. So when Kim, as she's known for, brought the final portrait into the office, she met my wife, Sonia, and they had a conversation which transpired into telling that I was an artist and I was starting to do pastel work and whatnot. So Kim and I started emailing one another, and I was showing her some of my work. And she said, "You're good enough that you need to join my Pastel Association," which was the Pastel Society of the West Coast. So that was 2005. And in 2006, I entered my first show with the Pastel Society of the West Coast in Sacramento, and I won a first place in new members. So
Excellent.
that was the kickoff of this whole.
Started the ball rolling, right?
Yep, that's right. Thanks, Kim.
That's great. So I know, Doug, you had, stepping back a little bit, you showed me one time, I think it was maybe a charcoal sketch that you had gotten, you'd gotten an art kit. I believe it was a Walter Foster
Right.
art
Right.
kit, and you painted or drew a dog.
Right. I can show you
I
that.
think you should show everybody that. And how old were you when you did that?
This is probably 8 or 9, 10 years old, something like that.
So this guy's he's been kicking around in this art world for a couple of years.
Okay, that's my sketch. And this is the book that I got it from.
Yeah, that's great, Doug. I think it's wonderful that you kept some of those
That's
childhood
8, 9, 10
drawings.
years old. This is one of my early sketches. I don't know when I did that. It's probably 6 or 7.
That's great. Oh,
This is me creating a Halloween mask with cut paper.
that's pretty cool.
That is my first oil painting. It's on a piece of wood I found around the house or the yard. That's a watercolor of Lake Tahoe. This one I'm pretty proud of. That's a watercolor. And that was, again, about 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, somewhere in there. At any rate.
Yeah, so you definitely have a gift, and it's great that you kept and preserved those images.
Well, there was one that I wish I had saved from, I don't know, it was a kindergarten, second grade, something like that. One of the schools I attended, we lived on 3rd Avenue in Sacramento, just off of Broadway. And I went to Sierra School. And one of the teachers said, okay, your assignments for whatever the whole class was, to come up with some kind of a poster or whatever for Easter. So I did this rainbow kind of a shape, and that became a body of a rabbit. And I put at the head of it rabbit ears and whatnot, and a tail at the end. I kept that for years, and finally, last time I opened it up, it just crumbled into pieces. There was no way to save it.
Oh, that's too bad. Yeah. So Doug, once you started your fine art career, you've gotten some significant awards. I mean, you just said that your first PSWC entry was a first place. So it's like, where do you go from there?
Well, I'll show you that piece, in fact. Okay, early.
How large was that piece, Doug?
That's the first one.
Oh, that's
Won the
beautiful.
award 2006, called Silent Shadows.
Fantastic.
And this area right here, I was experimenting with watercolor backgrounds, and it, as a lot of people know about watercolor, if you paint an area and you sprinkle salt on it, all the salt crystals will absorb the paint. And that became kind of the whole theme of making that kind of crystal looking snow.
So that's a beautiful piece, Doug.
Thank you.
So are you, once you started this art journey with the pastels and the fine art, tell us about some of the other shows that you've entered and some of the awards that you've won. And
Well, it's as you said before in the opening, I think I've had images in a pastel journal for about maybe 4 or 5 times anyway. And in fact, the last times I was in, I had 2 images in there as honorable mentions. But I've had acceptance into PSA, IAPS, the Northwest Pastel Society, the Eastern Canadian Pastel Society, the Degas Pastel Society, the Arizona Pastel Society, and the PAO, which is the Pastel Artist of Oregon. In fact, that one, that was a cool piece. Where is that one? That one.
oh, that's a nice one. I remember seeing that. That was great.
Yeah. I got an award, I think, with that one from Richard McKinley.
Mhm. Yeah, if I remember, that was an online show, wasn't it?
Yep.
So probably your most recent big win was the first place in last year's 99 Voices, the
Right.
PSWC's Pastel USA show.
Right.
And I think I would love you to show everybody that piece, because it's just such an outstanding piece of work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've really been concentrating on my underpainting with this textured surfaces. And I know that there's quite a few people that use underpainting with a lot of gessoed textures and whatnot. But what I'm trying to do is do it in a way that enhances the motion or follows some of the directions inside a painting. So I'm really trying to develop that more and more, not to be too much of an influence on the painting, but in fact, here's one that I just did recently. This one, you can see that all these directional signs or lines are the underpainting, but when you come over with the pastel and rub it in or work, it really brings a lot of motion to the painting, which I really enjoy. In fact, let's see. There's Here it is.
So Doug, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like you to share with people how you, yeah, there you go, how you do that and what you're putting together to get that ground and that base for your paintings.
Right, this was just a little test piece I have. I use gator foam board as my surface. And when you go over it with the different mediums, that's my brush that I use. Beat up old brush. This is Golden's acrylic ground for pastels. And that's the base that I mix gesso as well as acrylic color. And that's kind of my base color that I use. It's a kind of a medium tone that I work from.
Yeah, that's a beautiful tone. So how much of the ground of the acrylic ground are you putting in with the, so you're putting some acrylic paint, the ground.
Right.
And
It's probably
gesso.
the acrylic ground from Golden is probably like a cup. And then I color it with the acrylic color. But I put a little gesso in there to build up a little bit of texture. It just has some more body to it. I've experimented with it many times and come up with this recipe, and it's been working for me. So I'm going to stay with it.
Yeah, it's great. Is it how textury? Have you tried? Is it the Color Fix gesso that has the ground in it, and it's a colored gesso as
No,
well? Is yours more textury?
I haven't tried that, no. And I do have one that I just got the other day that's a clear. And what I'm trying to do is if I wanted to rub out the pastel down to the base acrylic, that it would become white again. And then leave it white and not have a color there. But I haven't gone into experimenting with that yet, quite yet. But yeah, there are so many materials out there anymore for pastels. It's the renaissance that's happening now for pastel is really fantastic.
So Doug, tell us then if you don't mind your procedure once you've got your boards prepped, and then what do you start your actual painting with?
Well, I'll show you one example in that texture. Well, that's that one. This is, I start, and you can see that ground color there, but I use that new pastel with my darkest colors first, just to get some of the shapes that I'm going to be painting out of with the pastel on top of it. And I'll put the new pastel down, and then I'll melt it with a combination of alcohol and water to melt it. And sometimes I'll play around with it to just get a lot of drips and accidents and whatnot. I think that's all I had. Well, here's another one. But you can see that texture really working. But I start off by making the darkest shapes. I just build it from the darkest shapes first, and to build my composition. One of the things that I actually do too is all of my reference photos, which I take, I run it through my computer in Photoshop, and I actually design my whole painting in Photoshop. so that I understand what the roadmap that I'm building is, and I understand where I'm going with it. And I can make any changes at that point, because in Photoshop, you can erase things or bring in other trees, or, eliminate and edit in Photoshop, as opposed to just looking at the photograph and just translating it from there. I like to go in and edit in Photoshop first. Then I print out what then becomes my reference point, and then I grid off my work, and it goes from there. So I basically start by designing in Photoshop from my own reference point, photos that I take.
Yeah, so that's great. So you pretty much use the Gator board as your substrate,
Right.
and
Yeah,
then
because
you
it's
don't
so,
use any other papers.
I've used a multimedia board that they make a pastel surface. And at one point there was a show in Auburn, California, and Dwayne Wacom was there with one of his paintings, and he was discussing his technique of using watercolor paper as his surface. Was mounted on board though. So I asked him how he did it and whatnot. So I started using watercolor paper, but it was a very arduous kind of technique of mounting the watercolor paper on board. But there's other ways you can mount it. You can dry mount to it, but you've got to go to some place that has a dry mount press, or do it yourself. And I tried something called a Yes glue, and you have to water it down to a point where you can squeegee it all out, but you got to make sure that you don't squeegee too much out, or you just squeegee the glue all out from underneath. So that worked for a while, and I love the texture of cold pressed paper for watercolor. But it just became too much of a guesstimate to try to get the watercolor paper mounted correctly. So I started with my own surface, and that sort of blossomed from that.
Well, that's a great idea. So when you're wetting your new pastel for your underpainting, you said you're using water plus alcohol?
Yeah, it's about a 2-to-1 more water than alcohol.
And are you using just rubbing alcohol, or do you use
Yeah, it's just a 70% rubbing alcohol that you get from CVS.
Yeah.
But it just helps to dry the medium of the watercolor, or the water. And when you're, again, using a brush over the new pastel to melt it. And I love the fact that accidents can happen. But if you wait for those to happen and use those to your advantage, to me, that's the serendipity moment that, oh my God, I didn't know I could do that. Or look what happened.
Yeah.
And you go from there, and it helps. I always say that somewhere along the line, you have to listen to the painting, because it's going to tell you how to finish and complete it. Something that you hadn't planned on, but it leads you to the point that, my gosh, the inspiration and your intuition come at a point that, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah, don't fight it.
Don't fight it. Yeah, let it happen.
That's wonderful. So do you have in your whole process then, Doug, are you using any do you use any workable fixative to build up texture or anything?
Yes, I was using first workable fixative by Krylon, and then there was a whole series of other fixatives that came along, and then Spectrafix came along, and right here, a couple of cities from me in Emeryville, a lady developed a fixative. It's called Spectrafix, but it's based on a milk base. So it's biodegradable and all that stuff, but it's wonderful. It doesn't have that. The only thing that smells is the alcohol in it. In fact, you can buy a concentrate. So if you're going to be traveling, you can buy this little bottle of concentrate. And when you get to your destination, you can go buy a cheap bottle of alcohol or vodka or whatever and add to this to make your medium to spray on your work. And I've tried several ways of spraying. You can stand back and spray from a distance or spray right on top of it. And sometimes that will build up so much liquid spray that will drip. And man, that's almost like the watercolor or the water and to your news pastel when it starts dripping and whatnot. So again, that serendipity thing happens with the Spectrafix too. So I love it. That's the only one that I use. Yeah, that's the casein-based fixative, right?
Right. That's great. So, and when you're finished with a piece, are you putting anything on that piece as far as a fixative, or do you? And how are you framing yours? Are you leaving a spacer? Do you frame up against the glass? What do you?
Always a spacer, whether it's a matte spacer that the matte protects the work from the glass, or I have these little plastic spacers that go around the outside edge. And there's a guy called, he's up in Oregon, I can't remember that, but he showed me, it's kind of an adhesive back little plastic. You can get them in black or clear. And you can actually make a sandwich out of your glass and the artwork. And he said you can tape all around the outside, and that becomes your protected piece. Then no dust or whatever can get inside that. I haven't done that lately, but it's kind of a intensive kind of thing, labor intensive. But yeah, I use a spacer on all of my work.
And do you have a favorite pastel that do you have a favorite go-to?
Oh my goodness. That's like asking me what color I'm going to use today.
Yeah.
They're all good for different reasons. My first set that I got was I got a whole drawer full of them over there, but I don't like them as well as I think my go-to would be Giraud. If I had nothing, if that was the only pastel in the whole market, I would be happy, because they're like in a medium, they're soft as well as a little bit in the medium texture. But my gosh, I have Terry Ludwig, American, Great American. If you look at my box over there, I'll show you my my studio just a little bit here.
So Doug, if you were going to, if somebody was a beginner and they said, but what would be my best option for pastels? What would you tell them to start out with as far as pastels?
Well, to begin with, I think, hang on a sec. That was it, Rembrandt. Rembrandt is to me a little harder than Schmincke or Saulnier or any of those. And if they were beginning to work with that as a beginning pastel, I think that's one I would start with. But then you can graduate into the better ones for sure. I was going to show you. No, that's not that. I should have labeled these.
Got a good library there.
Oh, this is Rembrandt here. This is Saulnier, and this is Giraud. And I keep those all in just one setup like that.
Yeah, they're beautiful pastels for sure. So Doug, what's your favorite process for deciding what you're going to paint? What's your reference finding when you want to go out and look for something to paint? What do you do?
Well, as you know, I have like I call it a visual whiplash, and my wife drive her crazy because as we're driving down the road anywhere, I see things, and while I'm still driving, I'll pull out my cell phone and I'm taking pictures as I drive along. And so she's kind of my co-pilot, says, okay, watch where you're going. But I do a lot of cell phone images. And sometimes I'll go back and there's one particular a story that we were invited to a housewarming around Christmas time over in Ione, California, which is sort of above Stockton out towards Jackson. And on the way out there on Highway 12, this is in December, obviously, and came across a field that had been harvested for corn. And the tractor treads that were left on the ground were full of water. And that was impetus for me to come back that afternoon from our Christmas party with our friends. So I stopped, took some pictures, and I said, no, this is not working. The lights are wrong or whatever. So I came back the next day and took some more pictures. But it was that painting called Duck Landing, won all kinds of awards. In fact, that one is that book, Pure Pastel, that was published by North
Yes.
Light. That one is in there, as well as my there we go. This is that one.
Oh yeah, that's a beautiful piece.
As
I
you-
have that book.
Yeah, and this is where you do a lot of editing. This mountain back here, which was Mount Diablo, was actually behind these trees over here. So a lot of artists who work in the Bay Area down here know what Diablo looks like. So I had to be very careful about what the shape was and whatnot. But I moved it over there just as not only a graphic shape, but the faded color back there and whatnot, so that you don't dictate or let the photograph dictate to you. You can dictate anything you want and move things around. You're the conductor of this music that's going on here.
Yep, and you've got the right to take your artistic license, right?
Yeah, exactly. Here's another one that this was a small little picture that I took on a little boat trip on a Elkhorn Slough near Monterey and Moss Landing. And way off in the distance was this little group of trees on a hillside. And the original photograph, you could barely see the trees and whatnot, but that was my impetus to make this nice composition with this sloping, the shape of the trees and this slope and inviting you into the painting that way. And it just, that both of those pictures, Duck Landing and this, were in pure pastel.
Yeah, I can see why. Those are both beautiful. So if you're, who do you think from, artists from the past, who are your biggest influences and
Oh, my goodness. Oh my gosh. Actually, growing up, my folks used to take the Saturday Evening Post. And Norman Rockwell was the first time I recognized the fact that somebody was an important artist. And the other person was my folks had a friend at church who was the cousin of Dong Kingman. He was an important Asian artist around the San Francisco Bay Area. And we had a cabin up at Tahoe, and one of the families down the street was the name of Mr. Doan. And he was an artist that my parents said, you ought to go talk to him about what your professional career might be as an artist and whatnot. So there was those influences. But as you get into art school and get into art history, obviously Degas and Monet and John Marin and any number of artists. My gosh, how much time do we have?
Oh, I'm sure they'll cut us off at some point, or people will start falling asleep or something,
But Joaquin Sorolla, my gosh, certainly Chagall, you name it. That just art is art, and people say, how can you judge a piece of art by what it is? And I said, that's just what it is. You can't judge it by your standards. You have to judge it for what it is visually right in front of you. Mm-hmm. I just judged a show for the Oakland Art Association, and the art show was in the lobby of the Alameda County Law Library. And unfortunately, the day that I was supposed to go judge the show in person was storming and flooding everywhere. And so they decided, okay, you can do it online. So I judged that show, and it was everything: watercolors, oils, collages, and even one person did a I don't know if you call it needlepoint or whatever, but the thread, she made this portrait in thread, and it's art. So art is art wherever you find it. But so yeah, my influences were anybody and everybody, but probably one of the biggest influences were the illustrators of the 60s and 70s. And again, that's why I went to 3 workshops. I went to in one of the illustrated workshops in New York, and in 1980 we went to Paris to do a workshop there, and then there was another one in Monterey. And in Paris, we got to go to Giverny and see the Monet's gardens. And it was interesting. I was stuck all day inside the convention or the conference with all these illustrators, and my wife was out with all the other wives taking in the sights in the city. And so we were comparing notes. And I was like, hey, you need to stay here. We were supposed to go back to London and stay another couple of days, but we decided to, no, let's stay here in Paris and cancel the London stuff.
That's great. So Doug, the book that you had those 2 pieces in, it's pure pastel, right?
Right,
And it was published by, I think, Northlight, correct?
right,
A few years ago.
right. And
About
Ann
17.
Havener, who is the editor of Pastel Journal, was the editor of that book.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful book. And I'm really happy that you have work in that. So do you, I don't know about you, but I've got a good library of art books and references and great picture books and things that I love and motivational books. Do you have some favorites that?
Oh my gosh, yes. In fact, I was looking up one Monet's Pastels. It's a huge book of all his pastel work. That's one of the books I have. One of the books that I was really happy to be associated with, only from the standpoint of, I don't know if you can see this one.
Yep.
Margot Shoko's A Painter's Guide to Design and Composition. And as you can see, all of my Post-it notes.
That's a well-used reference book.
Yes, it is, because it's so simple and explains a lot. So I refer to that a lot. Alan Flatman has a couple of books that he wrote. One of my nicest little reference books is by Edgar Payne. And another one is about, what is this one here? Well, it's called the Art Spirit Book. And I also have one by,
Is that excuse me, Doug, is that the Robert Henry book?
yeah, Henry.
Yeah, I'm just reading that. That's a fantastic book.
Well, it's a compilation of all of his dialogue from his classes.
Yeah, yeah.
And finally, somebody decided to write all this stuff down because it was so inspiring that he was able to not only teach what he paints, but just explain what art is all about and how you should go about doing the art and just your daily thought process.
So Doug, do you paint every day?
No.
No.
Life gets in the way.
Yeah, okay.
If I do, I'm painting once a month. But since I'm a studio painter, I can kind of delegate time to work on one painting a month. So thank goodness for Richard McKinley to teach us how to keep a diary of all your paintings and how to log them into a logbook so that they're, in order and whatnot. So I started doing that way back in 2005, I guess. But here's my logbook that I have everything logged in for size, what I did, what the size it was, what medium I used and whatnot. But yeah, 2005 when I started it. And people say, well, if you haven't done 1,000 paintings, right now I am at 177 paintings I've done. That's all.
So you don't go out and do any plein air work?
Well, yeah, I love plein air work, but again, life gets in the way.
Yeah.
So, because when you're traveling or whatever, you're experiencing whatever you're there for travel, and you take a lot of pictures, and hopefully you'll get, out of 100 pictures, you'll get one that will, give you a nice painting out of it. But I've taken workshops with Brian Blood and Paul Cratter and a few other artists and whatnot. But I love plein air. When I was in art school, that's all we had. We didn't, even the term plein air at that time was, no, we're going to go out on location and paint today. That was the term. So yeah, I love to go outside, but I love the fact that nature teaches you how to see. Because when you're looking at shadows or distance, atmosphere, you have to carry that with you when you're doing your studio work. Even though you have a photograph of it, you still have to remember the sounds of that windmill turning and the bees flying around and the flutter of a bedspread on a wire, or that little dust devil that closes the corral gate. You just have to remember those things. And when you come back in the studio, that photograph is not going to show you what's inside that shadow as much as you were there when you looked at it. So don't rely on the photograph to show you everything. Go out in nature and observe and take notes mentally, but know what you're looking at and remember what you see. Nature will tell you how to see.
You're very, very right. And I think, sometimes, I don't know if you do this, but I often have a little journal with me. So when I'm out there and I'm seeing some things that are just outstanding, I'll take a little time to do some notes.
Right. Well, that's another thing, that keeping a sketchbook when you're out there, again, if you have time to do it.
Mhm.
It's almost like you have to program your travel time or whatever. And in a sense, as an artist, you have to be very selfish with your time. And sometimes that doesn't work well with your family life.
Right.
So it's almost like you have to program that and plug that into your routine. But I love going out to paint.
So somebody had asked what the author of Art Spirit was, and it's Robert Henry, and it's Henry with an I on the end, not a Y.
You pronounced Henry.
Henry, right? So anyway, Doug, we're coming up close to an hour, and do you have any kind of final words of wisdom that you want to share with everyone?
Well, I think we just sort of talked about that. Trust your instincts when you're painting, and most of those instincts can be derived from observing nature, because it's all there. Everything that you're looking at and absorbing and smelling and feeling the breeze on your face, it's all there. And so you have to translate that and bring that to your painting and have that conversation with your painting and the viewer to your work, because it'll come through. If you love what you're doing, that love will translate to the viewer.
Those are really great words. I certainly appreciate your time, Doug, and we could probably go on and keep this conversation going on for a few more hours, but in terms of the essence of time and the recording, I'm going to thank you so much for being our first interview and sharing your works and your ideas and all with us. So thank you so very much.
Welcome.
And for everybody out there, our next Zoom We Talk Art is going to be on the 12th of February at noon again. That's a Sunday. And I'm thinking that we're going to have Natasha Eisenhower. I've spoken briefly with her about being the person that we'll interview. And I'm thinking she's going to be up for that. And if you haven't seen her work or know of her, go online and look at her work. She's a pretty amazing person and an artist as well. And also, if anybody has anyone that they would like interviewed, I'll do my best to try to coerce them into being interviewed for an hour or so in the future. We're doing 4 of these, basically 4 a year. We'll probably get to 5 this year because we wanted to do Doug, and then we'll do one in February, and then every 3 months. So thanks so much for your time, everybody, for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you, Doug. That was fabulous. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining, everybody.